Welcome to yet another exciting video on my channel on Azure. Today we are going to discuss about Azure databases in service, and specifically we are going to focus on SQL Server as a database. Though Azure offers number of different database services as a database as services offering, but in this particular tutorial our focus will be on the SQL Server side. Hi, I am Rakesh Suryavanshi and I am host for this video. I am a certified Azure technical architect and passionate writing about code into the automation tools such as in Terraform, Azure DevOps, PowerShell, .NET, using the .NET Core and all. I'll be presenting you about this particular session and we are going to discuss Azure Database as a Service. Let's begin. Now let's discuss first of all why do we need a database as a service in the Azure cloud offering. Before we go into that, let's discuss way back in like 15-20 years ago when people used to deploy their application core onto the IIS as in web hosting portal, and they used to have the database engine as in SQL Server. Let's take an example as a SQL Server, though there are some other options as well like Oracle DB or SAP or anything like that, but our focus is mainly around the .NET application or the SQL Microsoft database offering, which is SQL Server. So let's consider that the and when I started my career like in 2007, we used to have the application front end developed in either in Windows or web, which is written in .NET 2007 2008 and Visual Studio 2007 or 2008 basically, and the backend server we used to use is the SQL Server 2008. At that point of time, the application data was the capacity up to, let's say, few hundred GBs, like maybe max up to 100 GB, 250 GB, around that particular capacity of data. So to host the data, what typical organization used to do, they used to create the server, dedicated server for your SQL, hosting a SQL server. They install the SQL server along with this license. So if you're deploying it on production, you need to have the enterprise SQL Server license, and then you, on top of that, you configure your SQL Server on that particular dedicated server, and this works fine. It was the design which was best suitable at that point of time, but as and when the business grows after 5 years, 10 years and beyond that, the data grows, as the business grows, the data capacity of the data grows, and then there are some new additional features which has been introduced by Microsoft on SQL Server Azure, like they are introducing for their other services as well. So like we have, let's say we have started from 2008, then it goes to 2000 SQL Server 2012 and then 16, and now we are in 2020. So as we are, let's say, moving from 2008 to 2012, obviously I need to upgrade my SQL Server. I need to upgrade all the software patching, security, my SQL Server models, and then later on, instead of individual SQL Server, there was the offering for the managing the disaster recovery or the scalability, wherein we create this web server form or the SQL Server form with the help of availability graph, SQL Server failure management with the help of always on, and all those things used to come into the picture, wherein you, instead of managing one server, you used to make the make availability of your application, business critical application, you used to create number of servers, and you used to configure the SQL Server availability with the help of always on. While configuring the always on, you always go to the configure the active passive mode, wherein the active node always commits the changes on the synchronous mode, and the passive modes can commit the changes onto the asynchronous mode. So this is how the things started changing. Instead of like hosting the application onto the single server, it goes to the multiple server. So as we go to the change to these kind of changes, obviously the administration work or the management work, the security and all those things relate around the infrastructure. So you're, as a developer, there won't be any there won't be a huge amount of changes to manage the SQL server itself. But from the administrator point of view or from the security point of view, managing this much of data and security and the availability of the data was a kind of a concern. And that's the reason, you know, everybody was looking for a different service on which they don't need to invest again and again after a few years, let's say after every 5 years. Because now they started with, let's say we have started with the 2008, it goes to 2000 SQL Server 2012, then 2016. So every 4 years we have seen the trend that the new patches or the security or the software itself is getting upgraded, right? And everybody wants to keep up to the market and themselves up to the market, and that requires a huge amount of investment. And the whatever investment they've done in the past, basically that is not at all, that is not going to be used. Now the things, as the things are getting changed, the applications are getting used by the mobiles, tablets, or through the internet, the application data and demands are growing, the availability aspects and the SLA of the data is data protection, SLAs, everything is growing, expanding so vast. So now the concern is more, it's not only about storing the data and the protecting the data, but it's more about how do you provide the better SLA for your application, which application data which you are storing it on your database server. How do you are managing the patches, updates onto the server? How, what about the failover to your different database servers? So all those things are getting complicated, and it requires huge amount of investment. And when it goes to the cloud offering, which is, let's say, AWS or Azure, then the people started adopting cloud as an application hosting model, but they always had a concern about storing their mission critical data onto the cloud provider, because they always initially they used to have the concern about whether should they store their data, is it going to be protected enough to store the data, what about if the data is going to be lost, what if I lost the connection, how do we manage the SLA, and all those things. Those were kind of a main concern initially when everybody started moving their thought process onto the clouds. So that the organizations like Microsoft, Azure, Google, or AWS, they got a certain industry standard or world leading security certificates, which provides the assurance to the end user or to the customer that the data which they are storing, whether it is relational data or non-relational data, it's always going to be protected, and they own the level of trust from those certificate, and they are the certified organization to keep your data at the trust. So that way the things are getting started change, and now people or the organization, they started moving their data with the level of trust onto the cloud providers such as an Azure. Now it's good, they started moving their organizations data onto the clouds. People initially they started moving the data onto the hybrid computation, wherein they deploy their application front end onto the cloud, but the data they keep it on their legacy database server, which is still requires huge number of administration costs and all those things. Then the Azure offers the additional services, which is the databases service, which we are going to discuss. I know the introduction is bit longer, but to understand the concept of these service and the offerings, we just need a platform to start, and that's why we are discussing so deep on this particular topic. So as I was saying, the Azure offering as in database as a service, which includes as in a relational database, which is SQL Server, Oracle DB, or MySQL, and also some of the non-relational database such as in Cosmos DB or storage account itself, or maybe MongoDB or any other non-relational database. So it consists of all these kind of a database to data storage as in service. So in, from the point of view of the SQL Server, what benefit we will get and what are things we get as in service, we are going to discuss that. So if I move on to the objective of this particular demonstration or this tutorial, so in this case today we are going to discuss what is the SQL Server as in service from Microsoft Azure, which we have discussed, and then we are going to go ahead and create a SQL Server on Azure. We'll have a demonstration how do you create a SQL Server into the Azure. Then we will have a demonstration how do you migrate your existing database onto this Azure SQL. So there are variety of migration approach wherein you can migrate your database from your on-premise to the SQL Server Azure, or it depends upon basically the volume of data, the kind of data that you have. Do you have the 100 GB of data or 10 TB of data? So depending upon the size of data or the security concerns your organization has, there are variety of offerings which Azure provides to backup and restore your data onto the Azure SQL. So we are going to discuss some of them, which is going to be essential to learn as a developer for you. Next, we are going to look at some of the backup and retention or backup or restore approach, which is being offered by Microsoft Azure as a SQL service. So like in most of the cases, like if you go beyond standard to premium tiers, you would have the option basically to get the auto backup and restore feature max up to 35 days. So this is what we are going to discuss in this particular session. And then availability of your data, how Microsoft Azure assures you that your data is available to mitigate any kind of a disaster, or to how it manage the always on availability, what you used to manage it manually through the configuration on your on-premise legacy server or your web server form on the SQL Server. So that is which is something which we are going to discuss. This is the feature which has been inbuilt available on your SQL Server if you go to a certain specific tier. So we are going to discuss that as well.